Son-in-law pushed me off the dock at Lake Muskoka on a gray October morning. I went into 4 feet of water with the boat motor running 2 feet from my head. I lay face down in the shallows with my cheek pressed against cold stone, listening to the propeller churn, waiting for it to catch me. It didn't. When I surfaced, he was standing on the dock watching. He had his hands in his pockets. My daughter was standing beside him. Neither of them moved. That was the moment I understood everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to August when this started, because it didn't start on that dock. It started in my own boardroom, with my own coffee going cold in my hand, listening to 2 people I loved plan to take everything I'd spent 31 years building. I'm 63 years old. I run a mid-sized commercial construction company out of Barrie, Ontario. Bellowick Infrastructure. Started it in 1994 with a used pickup truck, a line of credit from TD that I nearly defaulted on twice, and a reputation for finishing jobs 2 weeks ahead of schedule. We do municipal contracts mostly. Roads, drainage systems, that kind of work. Not glamorous, but steady. Government money is the most boring money in the world, and boring money is the kind that lasts. My son-in-law, I'll call him my son-in-law because that's what he was, legally, had been with the company for 4 years. My daughter brought him in. She'd been my operations manager for 6 years before that. And when she told me she wanted to promote him to VP of Project Development, I said yes without thinking hard enough about it. That was my first mistake. You don't give someone authority because you trust the person who loves them. You give authority because they've earned it. I knew the difference. I forgot it. His name is Damien Rourke. I'll use his real name because he used mine in court documents, and I don't owe him the courtesy of anonymity. My daughter's name is Nadia. She has her mother's eyes and my stubbornness, and, as it turned out, Damien's judgment about money. It was the 3rd week of August, a Tuesday. I'd come back from a psych meeting in Aurelia earlier than expected because the engineer was sick and we'd postponed. I walked into my building on Dunlop Street at 2:30 instead of 5, poured myself a coffee in the kitchen down the hall from the boardroom, and heard Damien's voice through the door. He wasn't whispering. That told me he'd checked my calendar and confirmed I wasn't there. He's not going to hand it over, he was saying. You know him. He'll die at that desk. Then we work with that timeline. Nadia's voice. Flat. Businesslike in a way that made my stomach drop because I recognized it. It was the voice she used on contractors she was about to renegotiate with. He's 63. If we position ourselves correctly with the board and the bank, the transition can happen without his cooperation. The bank wants a signed succession document. I can get him to sign something he doesn't fully read. He trusts me. I stood in the hallway with my coffee. A minute passed, maybe 2. I counted ceiling tiles. There were 11 between me and the boardroom door. When I walked in, they were sitting on the same side of the table. 2 laptops open. The kind of casual posture people adopt when they want to look like they've been there for hours. Early day, Damien said. How was Aurelia? Postponed, I said. What are you 2 working on? Q3 resource allocation, Nadia said. She held my gaze a second longer than necessary. Nothing urgent. I nodded. I took my coffee to my office at the end of the hall. I locked the door, which I'd never done before, and I sat with my hands flat on the desk for a long time. I want to be clear about something. I've spent 31 years making decisions about people. Who to hire, who to trust with my company's name, who to cut loose when they stopped earning the faith I'd put in them. I'm not naive. I've been cheated by suppliers, slow-walked by city procurement officers, underbid by competitors who used substandard materials and disappeared before the warranty claims came in. I know what people look like when they're deceiving you. They look normal. They look like they've been there for hours. They hold your gaze a second too long. I knew what I'd heard. I didn't want to know it, but I did. I started reviewing the company accounts that evening. I didn't tell anyone. I just stayed late, ordered a sandwich from the place on Bayfield, and went through 4 years of Damien's expense approvals 1 line at a time. It took 2 evenings to find it. Northern Rock Consulting, monthly invoices, $4,500 to $9,000, listed under Project Management Support Services. 38 months. I pulled our vendor registry. Northern Rock wasn't in it. I searched Ontario business registrations. Northern Rock Consulting Inc. had been incorporated in 2021. Registered address at a postal outlet in Sudbury. Director listed, a numbered company. I dug further. The numbered company's director? A name I didn't recognize, but the mailing address matched Damien's mother's house in Timmins. Amateur hour. Truly, the kind of thing a man does when he's confident no one is looking. I photographed every screen. I created a folder on my personal laptop, password protected, backed up to a cloud account Nadia didn't know existed, and I started building a file. Over the next 3 weeks, I found $214,000 in payments to Northern Rock, every one of them approved by Damien, none of them corresponding to any deliverable I could identify. I found 2 additional vendors with similar patterns, small amounts, regular intervals, spread across enough line items to look like noise in a quarterly review. It wasn't noise. It was $287,000 over 3.5 years, and it had Damien's digital signature on every single transaction. During those 3 weeks, I watched them watching me. Damien started copying himself on emails he had no business being included on. Nadia began showing up to meetings she'd previously delegated. They were checking the temperature, seeing whether I'd reacted to whatever they thought I might have overheard. I gave them nothing. I smiled at the right moments. I asked Damien about his weekend. I told Nadia the Q3 numbers looked strong. Then the call started. My business banker at RBC called on a Wednesday in mid-September. He sounded careful in the way bankers sound careful when they're about to tell you something they're not sure you already know. "Raymond," he said, "I wanted to follow up on the succession planning conversation last week. Nadia mentioned you're looking at a 5-year transition." I hadn't spoken to him the week before. I hadn't authorized any succession conversation. "Walk me through what she told you," I said. He did. Nadia had apparently framed it as preliminary conversations on my behalf, shared some internal documents, mentioned that my health was a consideration, which was news to me, as I'm in excellent health, and that the bank should begin preparing for a change in signing authority. I told him nothing had been authorized. He believed me, I think, though I could hear him recalibrating. After I hung up, I sat in my truck in the parking garage for 20 minutes. This wasn't just ambition. This wasn't just ambition. This wasn't just impatience. They were building a paper record, succession conversations with the bank, signed documents they'd maneuver me into, a narrative that would justify a transfer of control before I ever agreed to it. And if I died suddenly, fell off a dock, say, or had a heart attack, or met with some other convenient accident, the transition would look like it had been in process for months. I called my lawyer that afternoon, not the firm I use for contracts, my personal attorney, a woman named Constance Adler, who I've worked with for 15 years and who charges $800 an hour and is worth every cent. I told her everything I knew. She listened without interrupting. "You need a forensic accountant before we do anything else," she said when I finished. "And Raymond, don't sign anything. Don't let anything cross your desk that you don't read line by line." I agreed. I hired a forensic accounting firm out of Toronto the next day. I told them I was conducting an internal audit in preparation for a potential acquisition, which was technically true in the sense that I was acquiring evidence. Then I went home and acted like nothing had changed. The cottage at Lake Muskoka was Nadia's idea. She suggested it in late September, said it would be good for us to spend some time together away from the office, reconnect. I said yes because Constance had told me to keep them comfortable, and because I wanted to see what they were planning. The weekend was fine. Nadia cooked. Damien was charming in the effortful way he always was. The man has never given me a compliment that didn't feel like a negotiating position. On Saturday evening, we sat on the dock with beer and watched the sun go down over the water, and if you'd taken a photograph of the 3 of us, you'd have thought we were a happy family. Sunday morning, 7:30. I was down on the dock checking the lines on my aluminum fishing boat. The motor was running. I'd started it up to check the thermostat. Something I'd noticed was sticking. Damien came down the dock behind me. I heard his footsteps on the boards. I turned to say something, I don't even remember what, something about breakfast. And his hands hit my shoulders, full force, both palms, straight into my back. I went off the edge fast. The water was cold, that particular cold of a northern Ontario lake in October that hits you like a wall. My feet found the rocky bottom, 4 feet deep, maybe less, and I pushed up immediately, got my face above the surface, and the first thing I saw was the propeller. The motor had swung on its mount when I fell. The propeller was churning maybe 18 inches to my left. I pushed myself to the right, got my hands on the dock, and held on. Damien was standing on the dock. He was looking at me. His face showed nothing that I could identify as relief. Nadia appeared at the top of the dock stairs. She'd come from the cottage. Her timing was too quick, too precise. She'd been watching from somewhere close. When she saw me hanging off the side of the dock, her face did something complicated. Something that took about 2 seconds to settle into an expression of concern. 2 seconds is a long time. I pulled myself up onto the dock without help. My knees were scraped from the rocky bottom, and my shirt was soaked through, and I was cold in the way that makes your hands shake. But my mind was absolutely clear. Damien said I slipped. I told him I was going inside to change. I walked up the dock and past Nadia without looking at her. I went inside. I changed into dry clothes, put my wet ones in a bag, and I called Constance from the upstairs bathroom with the fan running so they couldn't hear me. October 6th, I said when she picked up. 8 a.m., Lake Muskoka. I need you to write that down. She wrote it down. She asked me questions I answered as precisely as I could. She told me to photograph my scraped knees before they healed. I did. She told me to get off the property as soon as I safely could. I went downstairs, told them I wasn't feeling well, thanked Nadia for the weekend, and drove back to Barrie. 3 hours in the car with wet hair and scraped knees, thinking with complete clarity about what came next. The police were my first call on Monday morning, but Constance had already managed my expectations. Damien would say I slipped. Nadia would corroborate. No witnesses. No camera. The dock was private property. The investigating officer was professional and thorough, and ultimately confirmed what Constance had predicted. Without evidence, there was no case. There was no criminal case. But there was another kind of case entirely. The forensic audit report came back in the 3rd week of October. I sat with Constance and the lead accountant, a quiet man from the Toronto firm who had the manner of someone who finds systematic fraud quietly interesting, and I read the executive summary twice. $287,000 in payments to shell entities, Northern Rock Consulting and 2 similar vehicles, every transaction approved by Damien. Funds traced through a series of transfers to a personal account in his name, then distributed to a joint account he held with Nadia. That last part landed harder than I expected. She hadn't just known. She'd received the money. Options, I said. Constance had prepared a list. We went through it methodically. The fraud gave me everything I needed for the civil case and the regulatory case. In Ontario, a company officer who approves payments to entities they control without board disclosure is in clear breach of their fiduciary duty. The amounts were large enough to trigger mandatory reporting obligations. We would be filing with the Ontario Securities Commission and the Canada Revenue Agency simultaneously. The company restructuring was my idea. Constance thought it was aggressive. She wasn't wrong, but she trusted my judgment. Billwick Infrastructure had 3 major ongoing municipal contracts: Barrie, Bradford, and a drainage project in Collingwood worth $4.1 million. I formed a new entity, Bellwick Civil Works, Inc., over the course of 2 weeks, using a corporate lawyer I'd never used before and billing everything to a personal account. Major contracts transferred to the new entity. Key staff: my project manager, my chief engineer, my most experienced site supervisors, were informed privately and moved across. 3 of them had worked with me for over a decade. Not one of them hesitated. When I was ready, I scheduled a company meeting. It was a Thursday morning in late October. Rain on the windows. Damien and Nadia arrived together, which they'd started doing lately. Coordinating, I suppose, presenting a unified front. They took seats across from me at the boardroom table. 4 other senior staff were present, including my operations manager, who knew everything. I distributed a one-page summary. Effective today, I formed a new operating entity, I said. Belwick Civil Works will hold the 3 major municipal contracts and the associated staff and equipment. The original company, Belwick Infrastructure, continues to operate under existing management. Damien read the page twice. His jaw tightened on the second pass. You can't just move contracts, he said. There are agreements, partnership understandings. There are no partnership agreements, I said. I'm the sole owner of both entities. This is a wind down, he said. You're killing the company to cut us out. I'm separating what I built from what you stole. Nobody in the room moved. The rain on the window was very loud. Nadia's voice, when she finally spoke, was different from any voice I'd heard from her before. Smaller. Dad, please. You co-signed the transfers, I said. The money went into your joint account. I have the banking records. She didn't have an answer for that. Damien put his hand over hers on the table, which told me they'd rehearsed some version of this. A unified front, presenting themselves as a couple facing an unreasonable patriarch. But my daughter's hand was shaking. I stood up. The meeting was over. They filed an injunction application within 2 weeks. Damien's lawyer argued I was restructuring the company maliciously to deprive them of a promised inheritance. Nadia's affidavit described me as increasingly erratic since the summer, a characterization I found interesting given that I'd spent the summer quietly building a case while acting completely normal. Constance was thorough in her response. She filed our forensic accounting report as an exhibit. She entered the banking records showing the transfers to their joint account. She entered the succession conversation records from the bank, demonstrating that Nadia had initiated those discussions without my authorization. The injunction application was dismissed. The judge's endorsement was 3 paragraphs, all of them unfavorable to Damien's position. The CRA investigation opened in November. The OSC opened a parallel inquiry the same week. Federal investigators contacted me for an interview in early December. I gave them everything, the audit, the records, the correspondence. I cooperated fully and completely because when the government wants to prosecute financial fraud and you have 347 pages of evidence, cooperation is the clearest path to the outcome you want. Damien's bank accounts were frozen in December. Their joint account, my daughter's account, was frozen as well. She called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the voicemail twice. She was crying. She said she hadn't known how bad it was. She said Damien had told her the money was consulting income, legitimate work he was doing on the side that he hadn't wanted to mention to me because he thought I'd see it as a conflict. She said she'd believed him. I sat with that for a long time. The truth is, I don't know how much she knew. I know what the bank records show, that she received the money and spent it. Whether she understood where it came from, I genuinely don't know. I thought about that a great deal over the winter. I thought about the cottage dock and the 2 seconds it took her face to arrange itself into concern. I thought about what she'd said to my banker, about my health, about the timeline. I've known my daughter for 37 years. I know her better than she thinks I do. I didn't call her back. The civil trial was in February. 4 days in a Barrie courthouse. Damien's lawyer tried 3 different arguments in sequence, abandoning each one when Constance dismantled it. The business had been promised to them. No documentary evidence supported this. My restructuring was retaliatory, irrelevant, as a sole owner has the right to restructure. I was mentally diminished. My doctor testified for 45 minutes, then submitted 3 years of my annual physical results. Objection withdrawn. Judgment in my favor. Damien ordered to pay $287,000 in restitution, plus my legal costs of $94,000. Nadia received a joint and several liability order for the same amount. The judge noted in his oral reasons that the pattern of fraud had been sustained and deliberate. Belwick Civil Works is operating well. We took on 2 new municipal contracts in the spring. My operations manager has effectively been running day-to-day since November, and doing it better than I would have, honestly. I'd been working shorter days, getting out on the water when the weather allows it. The cottage sold in March. I listed it privately, no real estate agent, Found a buyer through a business contact. I didn't need the money particularly, but I didn't want the property anymore. The federal charges were laid in April: wire fraud and tax evasion. Damien entered a guilty plea in June. His sentencing is scheduled for August. The Crown is recommending 22 months. His lawyer is arguing for a conditional sentence, which Constance tells me is unlikely given the amount and the duration. Nadia accepted a conditional discharge in exchange for full cooperation and testimony. She has a criminal record now, which means she can't hold a fiduciary position in a company in Ontario. She works as a bookkeeper at a small landscaping firm in Barrie. I see her truck sometimes on Dunlop Street when I'm driving in. She called me in May. I answered this time. She said she was sorry. She said she knew sorry wasn't sufficient. She said she'd spent months trying to understand how she'd let it happen, how she'd chosen him over everything she knew was right. She cried, but quietly, not in the way she used to cry when she wanted something, in the way people cry when they've understood something about themselves they can't undo. I listened to all of it. Then I told her that I'd watched her face on the dock for 2 seconds before she decided to look concerned. I told her I knew she'd had those conversations with the bank. I told her I didn't think she'd asked Damien to push me, but I thought she'd known he might, and I thought she'd decided not to ask him not to. Silence on the line. I told her I hoped she'd build something honest. I told her I didn't know if I'd ever be able to trust her again. I told her I wasn't going to pretend either way. Then I said goodbye, and I hung up. I drove out to Kempenfelt Bay that evening, parked on the waterfront, and sat in the truck with the windows down. The bay was calm. Somebody was out on a kayak, very far out, moving slowly toward the marina. The sky was a particular kind of orange that only happens over water in Ontario in early summer. I thought about 31 years and what I'd built and what it had cost and what it had survived. I thought about Damien in a federal detention center in August, which I found I felt very little about. I thought about Nadia at a desk somewhere, entering numbers into a spreadsheet for someone else's business, which I found I felt more about than I wanted to. Belwick Civil Works has 22 employees. Every one of them was hired by me or promoted by someone I trust. The municipal contract pipeline is strong. We have a bid pending on a significant drainage project in Innisfil that my engineer is confident about. Tomorrow I have a 7 a.m. site visit in Bradford. I'll drive up the 400, stop for coffee in Cookstown the way I always do. Get there before the crew. That's what 31 years looks like. Not a dramatic ending. Not triumph, exactly. Just the work continuing, in the hands of people who earn their place in it, on a morning that belongs to nobody but me. People ask me sometimes whether it was worth it. The legal fees, the months of pretending everything was fine, the forensic accountants, the court appearances, the cold drive back from Muskoka with wet hair and scraped knees. Whether I'd do it the same way again. I would. Every step of it, but not for the reason most people assume. It wasn't about punishing Damien, though the federal system handled that adequately. It wasn't about the $287,000, though I'll tell you honestly that watching someone spend money they stole from you is a particular kind of insult that doesn't fade quickly. It wasn't even about the company. Not really. Belwick Civil Works is doing fine. We were doing fine before any of this happened. What it was about. What I keep coming back to, sitting in my truck by Kempenfelt Bay or driving up the 400 at 6:30 in the morning, is the question of what you owe yourself when someone treats your trust as a resource to be mined, when someone looks at 31 years of honest work and decides the most efficient path to it runs through your death. I built that company with my hands and my judgment, and a willingness to show up when nobody was watching. That's not a romantic story. That's just what the work required, and the same qualities that built it. Patience, precision, the ability to stay calm when everything around you is moving fast. Those are the same qualities that protected it when it mattered most. Damien was counting on me to react like a man who'd been pushed off a dock, angry, frightened, impulsive. He'd watched me for 4 years and decided I was the kind of man who could be managed through emotion. He was wrong, and his entire plan collapsed on that miscalculation. Nadia is harder. I won't pretend otherwise. She's my daughter. I won't pretend otherwise. She's my daughter. I watched her grow up. I know what she looks like when she's genuinely scared and what she looks like when she's performing it. And on that dock, in those 2 seconds, she was performing it. That truth doesn't get easier with time. It just becomes something you carry differently. What I've come to understand is that the choices people make, when they think no one will hold them accountable, reveal something permanent about their character. Not something they're temporarily capable of. Something they actually are. Damien didn't become a thief and a coward in 2021 when he set up Northern Rock Consulting. He just found conditions where those things already in him could operate without consequence. Until they couldn't. I think about that when I'm on a site and I'm watching a young project manager make a decision. I'm watching whether they make the same call when I'm standing behind them as when I'm not. That consistency between the public self and the private one is the only measure of character that actually means anything. Everything else is performance. The dock is gone. The cottage sold in March. I don't miss it. What I have instead is this: a company full of people who earned their positions, a banker who calls me back within the hour, a lawyer I trust completely, and mornings that belong to me. That's not nothing. After everything that happened, it's actually everything.